Hello, and welcome to the end of an era. Looks like the guys at the Hearthstone team were finally tired of this strategy that had cropped up, which revolved around trying to defeat your opponent in one turn without requiring any cards on the board. Turns out that fighting for board control and battles between minions make an overall game of Hearthstone more fun and compelling, but taking 20 plus damage in one turn is not particularly fun or interactive.
Some of the least fun things are charge minions and direct damage to the hero. Because you can't really interact with them in the way that you can interact with other things. You have to kind of set your defenses up a turn before you expect to see those things, as opposed to, oh, you did something, now I'm going to react to it.
And it is with this in mind that a big change has been announced, set to go live in 1 week. Warsong Commander has been changed. It now reads, your charge minions have +1 attack, instead of the current text of all of your minions with 3 or less attack have charge. Now this news has shaken the world. This announcement actually made it to the front page of Reddit, the actual all front page. That's how I actually got the news. In the announcement post, Zeriyah, a community manager, takes a nod to the community by saying that we felt this change was necessary to help expand both future design space and to stand by our overarching game philosophy that battles between minions and fighting for board control is what makes Hearthstone fun and compelling. When I was over at the Hearthstone America Championship, I saw at least 5 instances where players would heckle community managers over the fun and compelling interactiveness, or lack thereof, of Patron Warrior. Turns out that the scapegoat is Warsong Commander, and boy is that getting the starving buzzard treatment. I really cannot agree with the severity of this. I didn't agree with Starving Buzzard, and of course, Starving Buzzard never sees play now. But Warsong Commander, surely that could have at least been a 2-mana 2/3, or a 3-mana 3/4. I actually happen to be a fan of Grim Patron, and I don't really play the deck that often compared with other top players. That's because I really recognize that it is a deck that requires a lot of skill and practice to play well. Having gone up against Patron Warrior a lot in ladder and in tournaments, I've actually been one of the players who hasn't brought it because I've always thought, okay, I can actually bring these decks instead, which will be stronger against the meta, or alternatively, okay, I can actually bring these decks that are strong against Patron and also strong against the other decks, and Patron turns out to not be so great. Some interesting statistics that have popped up here and there is that Patron really doesn't have that high a win rate at top ladder. We're talking about legend or high legend play of Patron, so not the scrubs misplaying Patron. By the way, as an aside, when Patron is played at rank 10 to 20, they have far below a 50% win rate. But at top legend even, Grim Patron just hangs out around 50%. The one stat that's been thrown around is that in the month of September, 6-0 had a 75% win rate with Grim Patron, one of the highest win rates with that deck, of course. And I actually think that's kind of nice to have that kind of deck where it is really skill-based, and being good at a deck gives you that extra 25% win rate on top of just your typical legend player. So I happen to be one of the players who would have liked having a deck like that around. Now I do understand though that a card or a deck may be nerfed not because it is strong, but because it is against the spirit of Hearthstone, so to say. And that may have been more the reason why Warsong Commander was nerfed. The balance change announcement states, we will continue to stand by our stance that we will only make adjustments to cards when we feel it is completely necessary. In the case of Warsong Commander, we felt this change was necessary to help expand both future design space and to stand by our overarching game philosophy. Probably one key thing to realize through this text is about future design space.
The card that is the biggest problem today, I think, and also going forward, is Warsong Commander. There's lots of cards that we would have liked to have made that we couldn't because they're totally broken with Warsong Commander. An example is Dreadsteed. We originally had Dreadsteed slated for Nex Ramus, and it was a neutral minion. And in combination with Warsong Commander, you would just play it and slowly machine gun down every minion on your opponent's board because every token that spawned had charge and would just run right back in.
Grim Patron was such a strong deck that you could not print anything that would go into Grim Patron. Printing meaning you could not create any more new cards for Warrior or Neutral that would go into the Grim Patron deck because it was already one of the strongest tournament decks, one of the stronger ladder decks when played well. So that did limit design space. And indeed, in the Grand Tournament, no cards were created that could fit into a Grim Patron Warrior deck. So I'm someone who hasn't brought Grim Patron to tournaments or played it in ladder, just because I always felt like there was a better lineup of 3 decks in Conquest Tournament mode, which would have a, on average, higher win rate than Grim Patron, which, since everyone was aiming at, would have, in my eyes, roughly a 50%, possibly even lower chance of winning against your typical lineup of Grim Patron, which is a 50-50, Handlock, which is unfavored, and Druid, which is debatably close, or possibly unfavored, or possibly favored, depending on who you talk to. But it turns out that Grim Patron, the deck, was really causing tournaments to kind of be warped, just because the Grim Patron deck was so good against a lot of aggro decks. It really kept the Zoo down, the Paladins down, both secrets and mid-range, kind of kept the Priests down a bit, the Shamans a little bit. The Grim Patron deck was so metagame warping for tournaments that you began to see just the Grim Patron deck and then 2 decks that were competitive or slightly favored against Grim Patron being very common. This created a lot of complaints that the tournaments are always having the same decks, just Druid, Grim Patron, Handlock, with a very few smattering of other decks, just because so many of the decks were bad against Grim Patron. So this change is going to open up a lot more decks to be viable, and with the major tournament of the BlizzCon World Championship Hearthstone coming up, that's going to be pretty exciting. It'll be a much more varied field because of this one change. And that is going to be good for spectators, because I think a lot of people are tired of seeing the same 3 lineup of Grim Patron, Druid, and Handlock. And indeed, Grim Patron has been a deck that has stood as number 1 in a lot of people's eyes for the last 6 months. A lot of the major websites and players have rated Grim Patron number 1. That said, though, with all of those pros of nerfing Grim Patron, I still can't get behind completely killing the deck. It does kill the deck. And I don't want that because, like I said earlier, this is a very skill-intensive deck, and I think it does have its place. I would have nerfed Frogging Berserker in the video I said down to a 2-3, but arguably a 3-3 would also be good. Because it is a problem that you can deal so much damage with no board. With the Frogging Berserker down to a 3-3 in this imaginary world where we nerf something else, you can't deal as much damage. You can't deal 40 plus, which actually makes some decks more viable. For example, big taunts, for example, warriors which armor up. That said, though, it is kind of still sickening, right, to think, okay, so instead of dealing 50 plus damage, you can hit 30 plus damage. That's still something that a lot of players don't actually enjoy seeing. So perhaps we needed a change more extreme than that. But this is a really extreme change to kill off the deck entirely. I wasn't going to suggest something like Warsong Commander gives charge to its adjacent minions, because I thought that would be too big a nerf. But upon seeing this change, I'm like, okay, this is a bit too much. I still actually kind of like the deck. How about, now I'm just starting to try to bargain and negotiate. How about Warsong Commander gives its adjacent minions charge if they have 3 or less attack? But anyways, it's done. I understand that this card, or cards in general, which give charge, have the danger of being able to be non-interactive, because your opponent can't stop you, other than taunt, which actually is a way to stop things, but they can't stop you from having no board and then just killing them. Even if it was just adjacent minions only, you go Warsong, you go frothing on both sides, and then you do the whirlwinds, you do the etc. things, and then wapow. So this is going to cause a lot of things to change. In the US Hearthstone Regional Championship, I brought an interesting lineup. I brought mid-range paladin, druid, and control warrior. My lineup was partly because I had done the calculations that people wouldn't be bringing patron warrior to that specific tournament. So that does give a little bit of a hint towards decks that are going to be better, because Grim Patron is gone. A lot of things are going to change in both ladder and tournament formats because Grim Patron is gone. Big winners include Secret Paladin. Mid-range Paladin wins a lot too. Both the Paladins just turned out to be weak against Patron Warrior because the Silverhand Recruits get Whirlwinded, the Silverhand Recruits generate Grim Patrons, the Paladins tended not to be able to kill the Warrior quickly enough. Other big winners include Zoo. They had the Imp Gang boss, which would spawn a bunch of patrons. They had just not enough ways to kill them quickly enough. The Zoo couldn't kill the Patron Warrior quickly enough. The Implosion just created a lot of patrons. There's no board clear for the patrons. Priest killed the Grim Patron Warrior too slowly, but Priest is good against not combo, good against aggro, so Priest is a big winner. Face Hunter practically fell off the earth because Patron Warrior had Shield Block and Armor Smith and could stabilize the board and just armor up. Shaman mid-range gets a little bit of a boost, though still mid-range Shaman is a little bit inferior to mid-range Paladin, according to popular thought. Big loser, Handlock. Handlock had gained a lot of popularity in the tournament format because it was one of the few decks that had a positive win rate against Patron Warrior. So with the fall of Grim Patron Warrior, the most obvious winner is Secret Paladin, a powerful deck which was kept in check thanks to Grim Patron Warrior. But that's just the surface of it, because if everyone is going to be looking into, ooh, I can play my Secret Paladin and not get bullied by the Patron Warrior, then big winners include even further Dragon Priest, which gets a double boost because 1, it was weak against Patron Warrior, and 2, it is strong against Secret Paladin. And we had already seen quite a bit of Hunter running Flare. Hunter with Flare could be the new hero. One big loser is going to be mid-range Druid. Mid-range Druid was pretty good against Patron Warrior and is actually quite bad against Secret Paladin, which I expect to gain a lot of favor once Patron Warrior is gone. Additionally, Zoo, which hasn't been seen in forever, is also strong against Druid. The power rankings are going to shake up quite a bit. I would expect that the top decks shake out to be something like Secret Paladin, Dragon Priest in the short term. It does turn out that if Patron Warrior had gotten hit hard enough while still being viable, that these effects on the metagame would still happen. So I would have hit Patron Warrior. Perhaps if I were talking more with the Hearthstone team, I'd be more convinced, okay, fine, this isn't that healthy, even though I personally like it. We can hit it, but what I wouldn't do is kill the deck entirely.
We tried lots of things. We tried things like a 3-mana 2/3 charge, just deleting her text and making her a charge minion. We thought about Battlecry, give your damage minions some kind of buff, or Battlecry, give your taunt minions some kind of buff. Exploring with other build-arounds, but really we wanted it to feel like it had some kind of link to the charge mechanic. And we tried probably 30 or 40 different designs to see which ones felt the best to us.
It's done, and it is going to create a lot more variety in the metagame. Maybe this is the chance for that Dreadsteed deck to finally rear its head, with Patron Warrior no longer here to bully it. We'll see. So good luck to all of you aspiring deck builders. It turns out that one card getting nerfed will, in fact, turn everything on its head. RNG, open up a legendary for me. Let's make it a golden one. RNG, so please be on my side tonight.